Leonardo Castillo had always believed that life followed a structured path, one built with careful planning, strategic decisions, and unwavering ambition. As the CEO of Castillo & Sons Construction, he had spent the last 2 decades expanding his father's company into one of the most respected firms in the country. At 43, he had everything a man could want: wealth, influence, and a reputation for excellence. Yet, as he gazed out from the tinted windows of his black Cadillac Escalade, watching the city streets blur into the background, Leonardo felt an inexplicable sense of unease. He checked his Rolex, 9:30 a.m. sharp. He was due at St. Mary's Hospital, where his company was set to begin construction on a state-of-the-art neonatal wing. This was meant to be just another project, another addition to his empire, but something in his gut told him today would be different. As he pulled into the hospital's parking lot, his assistant, Caroline, was already waiting for him at the entrance, her tablet in hand. "The investors are on the 3rd floor, Mr. Castillo," she informed him as they walked toward the glass doors. "Let's get this over with," he muttered, adjusting the silk tie around his collar. But fate had other plans. As they passed the maternity ward, Leonardo caught sight of a familiar figure through the observation window. Isabella Ramirez. His breath hitched. It had been 2 years since he had last seen her, yet time had done little to dull her presence. She stood near a newborn's crib, dressed in crisp nurse's scrubs, her brown hair neatly tied back. The soft overhead light illuminated her face as she gazed down at the infant in her arms, a tender smile curving her lips. For a moment, Leonardo was frozen in place. The memories rushed back, the late nights spent dreaming of a family, the whispered promises that had turned to silence, the painful end that had left them both shattered. Then, as if sensing his presence, Isabella looked up. Their eyes met, and time seemed to stop. The warmth in her gaze quickly flickered into something more guarded, more distant. But in that brief second, Leonardo saw something else, something he hadn't seen in years. "Leo," she murmured, instinctively cradling the baby closer to her chest. He cleared his throat, forcing himself to speak. "What are you doing here?" She hesitated. "I work here. In the neonatal unit." A sharp pang shot through his chest. Of course she did. Helping others had always been in her nature. Before he could respond, Caroline cleared her throat. "Mr. Castillo, the investors are waiting." Leonardo barely registered her words. His eyes remained fixed on the baby in Isabella's arms. His pulse quickened. Was it hers? "Is he?" The question hung heavy between them. Isabella's expression softened, and she shook her head. "No, Leonardo. He was abandoned. They found him at the hospital's front door this morning." Relief washed over him, but it was quickly replaced by something heavier. Guilt. Regret. Longing. Caroline shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, we really should." Leonardo exhaled sharply. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low, steady. "There's nothing left to say," Isabella replied, her tone firm. "We said it all 2 years ago." And with that, she turned away, leaving him standing there, carrying the weight of everything that had been lost. Leonardo Castillo had once imagined a life filled with love, laughter, and the warmth of a family. He had pictured coming home to Isabella every evening, the two of them sitting by the fireplace, dreaming about their future children. He had believed, truly believed, that they were meant to grow old together. But love, as he had learned, was not always enough. 2 years ago, their home in Seattle, a spacious 3,500 square foot townhouse with tall windows overlooking Puget Sound, had slowly turned from a place of comfort into a house filled with silence. At first, the quiet was tolerable. Leonardo was busy with work, expanding his company's reach, and Isabella was focused on her career as a neonatal nurse. They told themselves it was just a phase, that things would get better. But the silence stretched longer, becoming heavier with each passing day. The first round of fertility treatments had brought hope. Isabella had clutched the pregnancy test in her hands, waiting for the result with nervous excitement. Leonardo had sat beside her, his fingers interlocked with hers. But the test had come back negative. So they tried again. And again. Each failure felt like another crack in their foundation. By the third round, Isabella had started withdrawing. She spent more time at the hospital, avoiding coming home. Leonardo, unable to handle seeing her in so much pain, buried himself in work, staying late at the office, taking on bigger projects, flying across the country for meetings that could have easily been handled over the phone. One night, after another long 16-hour workday, Leonardo had come home to find a single plate of cold food left on the dining table. Isabella was already in bed, her back turned to his side. They hadn't spoken in days. The next morning, she finally broke the silence. "We can't keep living like this," she had said, her voice calm, but her eyes filled with sadness. Leonardo had felt his chest tighten. "We just need more time. Things will get better." Isabella shook her head. "No, Leo. They won't." She had loved him, she still did, but love alone could not fill the growing distance between them. The treatments had failed, but it wasn't just the loss of a child they never had, it was the loss of themselves in the process. So, they made the hardest decision of their lives. The divorce had been amicable, efficient, and heartbreakingly cold. Papers were signed over coffee. No arguments. No dramatic farewells. Just a simple, quiet ending to a love that had once meant everything. Isabella had sold their home and moved to a small apartment closer to the hospital, seeking a fresh start. Leonardo had thrown himself deeper into his work, believing that if he built enough, bigger hospitals, taller buildings, he could somehow outrun the emptiness. But now, standing in that hospital hallway, looking at Isabella holding a baby, all of it came rushing back. The love. The loss. The life they had planned but never had. And for the first time in 2 years, Leonardo wondered if they had made a mistake. It had been a quiet morning at St. Mary's Hospital, the kind that made Isabella Ramirez feel at peace. She had always loved the neonatal unit, the soft hum of monitors, the rhythmic breathing of newborns, the gentle hush of nurses moving carefully between incubators. It was a place of hope, where fragile lives began their journey into the world. But that morning, hope had arrived in the most unexpected way. At 5:42 a.m., the hospital's night security guard found a cardboard box outside the emergency entrance. Inside, wrapped in a thin, worn-out baby blanket, was a newborn. His tiny face was flushed red from the cold, his fists clenched as if fighting against the world that had already abandoned him. The nurses acted fast. The baby was rushed into the neonatal unit, his body temperature dangerously low. His weight, just 5 pounds, 3 ounces, was below average, and his cries were weak. But he was alive. He was a fighter. Isabella had been in the middle of reviewing charts when she heard the news. She hurried to the neonatal wing, her heart pounding. "Where is he?" she asked, already pulling on a pair of sterile gloves. Dr. Sullivan, the attending physician, gestured toward the small bassinet near the incubators. "Right there." No note, no identification. Just left at the front door like a package someone didn't want anymore. Isabella swallowed hard. It was not the first time she had seen an abandoned baby, but it never got easier. She looked down at the tiny boy, his delicate features scrunched up as he let out a soft whimper. Gently, she reached for his tiny fingers. "Hey, little one," she whispered. "You're safe now." The baby's fingers curled around hers, holding on as if he already knew he had found someone who would never let go. For the next few hours, Isabella stayed by his side. She monitored his vitals, adjusted his blanket, and fed him carefully, drop by drop, through a tiny bottle. She was supposed to finish her shift at 7 a.m., but she didn't leave. The other nurses started calling him Baby Doe, the generic name given to abandoned children. But to Isabella, he was more than just a nameless infant. He needed a name. She thought about it for a while, then softly murmured, "Santiago." Dr. Sullivan glanced up. "Santiago?" Isabella nodded. "It means St. James, the patron saint of lost causes. But he's not lost anymore." The name felt right. Santiago wasn't just a child left at a hospital door, he was a new beginning. As the hours passed, Isabella found herself unable to step away. Every time she looked at him, something deep inside her stirred, a longing she had buried, a dream she thought she had lost. She had spent years mourning the child she never had. But now, holding Santiago's tiny hand in hers, she realized something profound. Maybe love wasn't just about blood. Maybe family wasn't something you were given, but something you chose. Leonardo Castillo had always believed in legacy. His father, Emilio Castillo, had built Castillo and Sons Construction from the ground up, turning it into one of the most respected firms in the country. From a young age, Leonardo had been taught that family was everything: its name, its reputation, its bloodline. So when Isabella had once suggested adoption, he had rejected the idea outright. "It's not the same," he had told her. "I want a child who carries my name, my blood." But now, standing in his mother's sunlit kitchen, Leonardo felt as though the ground beneath him had shifted. He stared at Rosa Castillo, the woman who had raised him with love and discipline, the woman he had admired his entire life. And yet, she had just said something that made everything he thought he knew crumble. "You're adopted." The words hung in the air like a bell still ringing. Leonardo let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "That's not possible." Rosa folded her hands, her expression calm but heavy with emotion. "It is, mi amor. We wanted to tell you when you were younger, but your father thought it was best to wait." And then, time passed, and it never felt like the right moment. Leonardo shook his head. "So, all this time?" "You were always ours," Rosa said firmly, reaching for his hand. "From the moment we saw you in that hospital crib, we knew you were meant to be our son." "The hospital?" Leonardo felt his chest tighten. "What do you mean? Where did I come from?" His voice was hoarse, as if it belonged to someone else. Rosa sighed. "A young woman gave birth to you at St. Mary's Hospital. She was alone, scared, and knew she couldn't give you the life you deserved. She left without looking back. Your father and I had been trying to have a child for years, but it never happened. And then, one day, we got the call, and there you were." Leonardo pressed his palms against the table, trying to steady himself. His whole life, he had taken such pride in being a Castillo, in carrying the family name, in believing that blood was everything. And now, he realized that he had been wrong all along. All those years he had dismissed Isabella's pain, refused to consider adoption, insisted on having a child of his own. And yet, he himself had been adopted. He looked at his mother, her eyes filled with nothing but love and certainty. She had raised him, nurtured him, shaped him into the man he had become. Did it really matter that they didn't share the same DNA? Rosa reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Your father used to say that love makes a family, not blood. I hope one day you'll understand that." Leonardo swallowed hard, the image of Isabella holding Santiago flashing in his mind. Maybe that day had finally come. For the first time in his life, Leonardo Castillo was questioning everything he had built. His world had always been about control, blueprints, contracts, calculations. There was comfort in numbers, in the precision of steel and concrete. Buildings didn't lie. They stood firm, unshaken by emotion. But people were fragile. And now, for the first time, he realized that he had been building walls in his own life, keeping out the very things that mattered most. Sitting alone in his office late at night, the city skyline glowing outside the window, Leonardo couldn't shake the conversation with his mother. Love makes a family, not blood. Those words echoed in his mind as he stared at the architectural plans spread out before him, the St. Mary's Hospital expansion project. A state-of-the-art neonatal unit, one that would provide better care for premature and abandoned infants. It was supposed to be just another project, another achievement to add to his legacy. But now, it was different. Now, he saw Santiago, the tiny boy Isabella had named, the child left at the hospital's doorstep with nothing. He had seen the way Isabella looked at him, the way she held him as if he were the most precious thing in the world. As if he were already hers. And Leonardo had seen something else, something that unsettled him. For the first time, he had recognized himself in Santiago. A baby left in a hospital, unwanted by the people who had brought him into the world. But given a second chance by someone who chose to love him. Leonardo exhaled and reached for his phone. "Caroline," he said when his assistant picked up, "I need you to revise the budget for the neonatal wing at St. Mary's. We're adding a new section, one dedicated to abandoned infants. And it's going to be fully funded." There was a pause on the other end. "Sir, that wasn't in the original plan. The investors." "I'll cover the cost," Leonardo interrupted. Another pause. Then Caroline said, "I'll have the revisions ready by morning." As he hung up, Leonardo felt something shift inside him. For years, he had thrown himself into his work, believing that if he just built enough, achieved enough, he could outrun the emptiness inside. But no skyscraper, no multimillion-dollar deal had ever made him feel the way he did watching Isabella care for Santiago. He had spent so long running from the idea of adoption, convinced that a family had to be tied by blood. And yet, the only reason he had a family at all was because someone had once chosen him. Maybe it was time to make a different choice. Maybe it was time to start building something that truly mattered. The night had been calm, the kind of stillness that usually signaled everything was in order. But in the neonatal unit at St. Mary's Hospital, the stillness shattered in an instant. Santiago was in trouble. Isabella had been reviewing paperwork in the nurse's station when she heard the first soft, rapid beeping of the monitor. Her heart clenched as she rushed toward the bassinet where Santiago lay. The moment she saw him, she knew something was wrong. His tiny face was flushed, his breaths coming too fast, his little chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked movements. She touched his forehead, it was burning up. A quick scan of the monitor confirmed her fears. Fever, 102.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Heart rate, dangerously high. "Santiago," she whispered, her pulse racing. She had seen infants struggle before, but this was different. This was personal. She didn't hesitate. "We need a doctor in here now." Within seconds, Dr. Sullivan and two other nurses rushed in. One of them adjusted the oxygen levels while the other checked Santiago's vitals. He's in respiratory distress, Dr. Sullivan said, his tone sharp with urgency. We need to stabilize him before his oxygen levels drop any further. Isabella felt her breath catch. Not now. Not when he was so close to being safe. She cradled Santiago's tiny fingers in hers as another nurse started in 4. Come on, little one, she whispered, stay with us. As if sensing her desperation, Santiago let out a weak cry. Then the monitors erupted into a shrill, piercing alarm. Code blue. The room exploded into action. Someone handed Isabella a small breathing bag, and without thinking, she gently pumped air into Santiago's tiny lungs, willing him to fight. Around her, nurses scrambled to adjust medications, while Dr. Sullivan barked out orders. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw him. Leonardo. He was standing just outside the unit, his face pale, his usual composed demeanor gone. He had heard the code blue announcement over the intercom and had run from his meeting without a second thought. He locked eyes with Isabella through the glass. She saw fear in his face, not the kind of fear he could conquer with money or power, but something deeper. A fear of losing something he hadn't even realized he needed. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then, finally, the alarm stopped. The frantic movement slowed. The numbers on the monitor steadied. Santiago's breathing calmed. His heart rate stabilized. He's okay, Dr. Sullivan finally said, exhaling. We've got him. Isabella closed her eyes, releasing the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Leonardo stepped inside the unit, his voice tight with emotion. Is he? Isabella looked up, exhaustion and relief mixing in her expression. He's stable. For now. Leonardo let out a slow breath. Then, something changed in his face, something resolved, certain, unshakable. Tell me what I need to do, he said. Isabella blinked, confused. Do about what? Leonardo didn't hesitate. To make sure he never has to fight alone again. The sun had barely risen over Seattle, casting a golden glow over St. Mary's Hospital. Inside, the neonatal unit was quieter than usual. The tension of the night before still lingered, but Santiago was stable, his tiny chest rising and falling in steady, peaceful breaths. Isabella sat beside his crib, exhaustion settling deep in her bones. She had spent the last few hours watching over him, unwilling to leave his side. Even now, she reached through the incubator's opening, gently stroking his tiny fingers. She had almost lost him. The thought made her stomach tighten. Isabella. She turned at the sound of Leonardo's voice. He stood at the entrance, still dressed in his suit, though his tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, a rare sight. But what struck her most wasn't his appearance. It was the look in his eyes. He had stayed. Not because he had to, not because of duty or obligation, but because he wanted to. How is he? Leonardo asked, stepping closer. He's stable, she said softly, glancing down at Santiago. The fever broke a few hours ago. Dr. Sullivan thinks he'll be okay. Leonardo let out a slow breath and ran a hand through his hair. Good. That's good. For a moment, there was silence. Then he said, I meant what I said last night. I want to help. Isabella frowned. Help how? I wrote a letter, he said, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a folded document. A recommendation for your adoption case. She blinked, stunned. You, what? I spoke to the social worker this morning. I told them that you are the most capable, loving person I know, and that there's no one better suited to raise Santiago than you. her breath caught in her throat. For so long, she had fought this battle alone, proving she could be a mother, proving she could give Santiago a future. But now, Leonardo was standing beside her, offering his support in the one way that truly mattered. She took the letter with trembling fingers, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this?" Leonardo hesitated. Then, he told her the truth. "Because I was wrong," he admitted. "About everything. About family. About what matters." He glanced at Santiago, then back at her. "And because I finally understand what my father meant when he said love isn't about blood, it's about choice." Isabella's heart clenched. For years, she had wanted him to see that, to understand that love wasn't something measured by DNA but by the choices people made every day. And now, he did. She swallowed hard. "Leonardo." But before she could say another word, Santiago stirred, letting out a soft, sleepy whimper. Isabella turned to him instantly, adjusting his blanket, her fingers brushing over his tiny cheek. Leonardo watched her, watched the way she instinctively comforted Santiago, how natural it was, how right it was. And for the first time in a long time, he felt peace. "Isabella," he said, his voice softer now. "When the adoption is finalized, I'd like to be part of his life." She looked up, searching his face, and for the first time in 2 years, she saw not the man she had divorced, but the man she had once believed in. And maybe, just maybe, she could believe in him again. 1 year later, St. Mary's Hospital stood as a testament to change, not just in its architecture, but in the lives it had touched. The new neonatal wing, now officially named the Santiago Care Unit, gleamed under the soft glow of the morning sun. The wing had been Leonardo's most personal project, not just another investment, but a commitment, one that had reshaped him in ways he never expected. Inside the unit, Isabella cradled Santiago, now a thriving 1-year-old, his bright eyes filled with curiosity as he clutched onto her necklace, giggling. His once frail body had grown strong, his laughter filling spaces that had once been filled with sorrow. Leonardo stood near the window, watching them. "Amazing how much can change in a year," Isabella said, rocking Santiago gently. Leonardo nodded. "It really is." She turned to him. "The wing is beautiful. You did a good thing here." He smiled, but this time, it wasn't the practiced, confident smile of a businessman. It was something real, something deeper. "I just built the walls," he said. "The real work happens in here, with people like you." Santiago reached toward him, his tiny hands waving in the air. Leonardo hesitated for only a second before stepping forward, lifting the child into his arms. Santiago giggled, gripping Leonardo's tie as if it were his favorite toy. "You've got a strong grip," Leonardo chuckled. Like his godfather, Isabella said, watching them with warmth in her eyes. Leonardo paused, caught off guard. "Godfather?" She nodded. "If you want to be." For a moment, he couldn't speak. A year ago, he had been a man who thought family was defined by blood. Now, he was standing here, holding a child who wasn't his by blood, but who had changed him in ways he never could have imagined. And Isabella, the woman he had once lost, but had somehow found again, in a different way, was offering him a place in this child's life. His throat tightened. "I'd be honored." Isabella smiled. "Good. Because I think Santiago already decided for us." Leonardo looked down at the boy in his arms, who was still gripping his tie, his little face full of joy. Maybe this wasn't the future he had once planned. Maybe it was something even better. As the ceremony for the new wing's opening began, Leonardo stepped to the podium. He looked at the crowd, hospital staff, families, investors, but his eyes settled on Isabella and Santiago. This building, he began, is more than just a hospital wing. It's a promise. A promise that no child will be left behind. A promise that love, real love, isn't about where you come from, but about who chooses to stand by you. As he cut the ribbon, applause filled the air. But all he heard was the soft laughter of the child in his arms. And for the first time in his life, Leonardo Castillo knew he had finally built something that truly mattered. As we grow older, we come to realize that life is not about the perfect plans we once had, but rather about how we adapt when those plans change. Loss, regret, and broken dreams are inevitable, but they do not define us. Instead, it is how we choose to move forward that truly shapes our lives. Leonardo's journey is a powerful reminder that family is not just about blood, it is about love, presence, and commitment. Many of us hold on to traditions and beliefs about what a family should look like, yet life often teaches us that the strongest bonds are built through choice, not biology. We all make mistakes. There are things we wish we had done differently, relationships we should have fought harder for, words we should have said, time we can never get back. But this story teaches us something profound. It is never too late to change. It is never too late to choose love again. Perhaps there is someone in your life who needs a second chance. Perhaps there is a relationship that still has room to heal. Maybe you have been holding on to regret, thinking it is too late to make things right. But the truth is, redemption is always possible. Love is not about the past, it is about what we choose to do today. Whether through forgiveness, kindness, or simply showing up for those who need us, we have the power to shape a future filled with love, purpose, and connection. Because in the end, family is not just given, it is created. And the greatest legacies are built not in wealth or accomplishments, but in the love we choose to give and the lives we choose to touch.